Welcome back to the Let's Talk Social Innovation Pod, everybody. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart it right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahende, and this week I have a very special guest here with me in the studio. Funny I say that, tag Mo in the studio, Morgan
Hey,
Overton.
yes,
Tell
it's
him what's up,
me. What's up, everybody?
So you have a lot of titles as a very accomplished individual, but how do you want everybody watching and listening to this to know you as?
Thank you. I have to say, first of all, when you introduce yourself, I always have a little bit of a surprise because it's like, wow, I did all that, So I appreciate you allowing me to look at all my hats because it's just so easy to put them in the box sometimes. But again, my name is Morgan Overton. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a born and raised Pittsburgher. Sometimes I sound like it, sometimes I don't. It depends on who I'm around.
Do you say it Yins?
I do not.
I was gonna say that's a them
I
thing.
do not. But I do say giant eagle. I do say terrible towel, But
Okay.
I'm a visual artist. I currently serve as artist in residence for the Fredrick Honors College. I'm a proud 2-time Pitt alumna, and I also serve as vice chair of the Allegheny County Democratic Committee. And that's just enough hats for now for this conversation.
That's definitely a lot of hats. I feel like Black women in society, it's like your society puts you in a box. And it was like you were saying, it's you don't always wear your hats.
Mm-hmm.
But this is definitely a good place to be able to show them.
Thank you.
But in this episode, we're going to be getting into Morgan's backstory, going to be talking about her political work with the Democratic Party, artists in residence here at Pitt. And then in the second half, we're going to be getting into what we call the artist dichotomy. But first things first, let's get this introduction off the bat. Tell us about what it was like. Tell us about your backstory and being raised.
Yeah, how much time we got? No. But I also want to extend appreciation for starting this conversation with somebody's story because we all have stories. We all have multiple stories. We all have multiple identities or intersections. I want to raise up Audre Lorde, who was an amazing Black feminist writer who said there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because none of us live single issue lives. So I think just taking a bird's eye view of that and honing in on somebody's story is so important to ground the conversation. But like I said, I'm born and raised from Pittsburgh, from Penn Hill specifically. I'm an only child to two parents who just poured into me in every which way. And I think because both of them had humble beginnings in their trajectory into life, they were very intentional with how I was able to experience the world. And I always joke that, my first hat that I ever wore was an artist because, both of my parents are both creative spirits. And we'll definitely get into that discussion later about, how important it is to invest in the talents that your children have because it can really set the tone for them later on. But I also had humble beginnings growing up. I didn't have a rich uncle I could defer back to and, hook a sister up. I'm the first in my family to attend a 4-year university. I'm the first in my family to do many of the milestones that I've accomplished in life. Not only attending Pitt for undergrad, I worked at Harvard for 2 years after undergrad, and that was a culture shock, which will also lead to our conversation later on. First to go to graduate school, first. And I've always had their moral support, their emotional support, but I never had a blueprint to go off of. Everything that I've done, it was just kind of trial and error. And I say that I'm writing the blueprint as I go, and hopefully the next generation will do better than me. And, I'm proudly both Black and I have Native American heritage, specifically Haudenosaunee, which people may know in a colonial way called Iroquois.
Mm.
But there's an Iroquois principle called the seventh generation principle, which means you have to be mindful of the actions you take today because it'll impact 7 generations in the future.
Mm.
So every step that I take, everything that I've done up until this point, it was grounded in this is for the next generation, but 7 generations from now. But, having moral support goes a long way, but there were a lot of things that I wish I had to make the road less like a Pac-Man maze of just like
Mm.
skirt, skirt, skirt,
Yeah.
skirt, skirt. But I think, again, going back to the bio in the beginning, when I take a bird's eye view of it, it all feels linear at the same time.
Mm.
Even though in the journey it felt like, oh my God, I am pivoting away from what I thought I was going to do, what I was going to be. It all makes sense. And I don't think I would have regretted anything I've done. I wish it were kind of easier along the way, but
Nothing good comes easy.
no, never. So I think having that in mind is what keeps me grounded and also informs a lot of the work that I do to pour into the community.
So when it comes to trailblazing, what is the best aspect of being the first to do everything to you? And then what's the biggest downside of not having any blueprint, like you were saying, in front of you?
I would say there's multiple things that come to mind, but having trust in yourself, that can also be a downfall in a way because you have to make sure that you, first of all, are grounded in who you are and literally trust the process. But that can also be a downfall if you don't have reinforcements around you to say, girl, you got this. Or a lot of the work, right? A lot of what I do is to address systemic change. And I might not see that change in my lifetime,
But
but
7 generations.
7 generations might. But again, it's like having that trust. What is good about being the first is knowing that you will not be the last and that you've opened a door for somebody who wouldn't otherwise thought that that door would have ever been open for them. And so with everything that I do, my goal is to be the person I wish I had at whatever moment that was in my life or whatever communities or people I'm trying to impact. Just trying to fill that void, that gap, so that people don't have to continuously try to fill it themselves.
Being your own role model is a beautiful thing.
It's also scary.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to trust. At the end of the day, a Pittsburghism. At the end of the day.
Please. So from an outside perspective, there's 2 major pillars in your life. You have art and then you have politics. So you said that both your parents were artists, but when did art become a real thing for you?
So again, growing up, I would say multidisciplinary art was always a part of who I was, in addition to, drawing Tommy Pickles and entering that in a 3rd grade competition.
Oh,
or
did you win?
I did not, but it was
Humble
hung up,
beginnings.
right? But 90s kid. But I also danced ballet. I was also in band. I played the flute all throughout all of school, elementary through high school. But I knew for some reason visual art was calling my name louder than any of the others. And when I went to Pitt, I minored in studio art. I was a psychology major, art minor. And people are like, how does psychology and art come together? I'm like, don't worry about it. I'm going to just do it. But I would say I formally felt like an artiste when I moved to Boston. And it wasn't because of Boston. I think it was in spite of the experiences I had there. Again, I worked in a neuroscience lab where I was the only Black person in the entire vicinity.
We know what Boston's like to
Okay.
us. Yeah.
So it's not just in the history books, people. It is, I mean, you can feel the energy there. And so I graduated from Pitt in 2016. I moved to Boston in 2016. The summer of 2016 was a series of police brutality cases. Still the Black Lives Matter movement emerging. And then November 2016. Spoiler alert.
We don't talk about him.
Oh, no. But I always felt called to community there. But I always also felt called to art. And when I would be so stressed out from the microaggressions I experienced, feeling othered, feeling like I didn't belong, something told me to go home and look up a quote from James Baldwin. Actually, go paint a portrait of James Baldwin, who is such an unsung hero in the civil rights movement and just such a prolific writer about society. And so I wanted to just raise up these unsung heroes who gave me strength. They gave me inspiration to just keep my eye on the prize. And so I remember I posted my first painting that I did was of Malcolm X. Obviously not an unsung hero, but someone that we need to keep speaking his name, right? I posted my portrait of him and James Baldwin on Facebook. And people are like, oh my God, I need a print of this. And I'm like, oh, you want it? You like this picture I did? Okay. So I started making prints. Then, again, back home here in Pittsburgh, I'm over at Harvard, right? But then my family, my mom was working overnight at a major hospital with 4 letters that has the university's name in it.
A lot of money.
And she was so stressed. And I was like, I got to get you out of there. And so I made my own Etsy page. And that ended up becoming a way to not only support my art and share that with the world, but it also became a way to support my family. And eventually, my mom was able to leave and go work at a much healthier organization. So art for me became self-preservation. It became a way to honor the ancestors. And it ended up getting enough attention that the James Baldwin portrait that I just mentioned got to go travel to St. Paul de Vence, France, where James Baldwin lived for the last 17 years of his life.
So we international.
Yes. She's an international artist. That got to go to a place that he felt safe. I was able to exhibit across Boston and meet other like minds there. And then that's just what reinforced art intersected with advocacy. So I knew I was on to something there, and I never wanted to let go of it. And I think that's what set the course for me today.
So talking about art and advocacy, we haven't really touched on the second half of that, advocacy and your whole political journey. So where and when did that start?
Well, if we want to talk origin story.
Like your superhero story.
Right. Obviously, being a Black woman in America, my parents were very intentional about getting me prepared for what I would experience. But obviously, you need to experience the experiences to know what to confront. I remember very clearly I was on the school bus in 4th grade, and this was during the Bush and Kerry election. And I got into a whole argument with one of my classmates who was just a GW stan.
Please.
She was just like, we need to vote for him. I'm like, baby girl, we are like only 8 years old. But I remember distinctly, I was like, if he is president again, the world is going to end. And I just made this gesture of the world collapsing with my hand.
Please.
And then simultaneously, I looked over at the bus driver and I saw his face in the rear view mirror. Like, what are these kids talking about? I remember surveying my entire class that year. If you could vote, who would you vote for? Majority of the class said Carrie, and I said, yay, I don't have to move.
Like,
But, what kids are paying attention like that? I wish my mom especially had people to motivate her to go to law school or go study political science, because she is such a student of history. I was a PBS kid growing up, like Ken Burns documentaries were in the background.
Yep.
That I think it was just in my consciousness. I remember growing up seeing Bill Clinton all the time on TV and just having it like, oh, what's going on? Okay. When 2008 came along, of course, she had obesity, as we always called him.
My guy.
Right? Something lit a fire in me in 2008. I was not old enough to vote yet. I had 3 years to go. But seeing so many young people organize and mobilize and feel like they're part of this moment was so inspiring. And I remember my dad took me into the polls with him for that moment. And I remember that day so well. So when 2012 rolled around, I was like, sign me up. We got to get him reelected.
Yep.
Now, I was a first year here at Pitt. Now, this is before really any field offices were popping up. So I remember I was commuting back and forth from Penn Hills. And the nearest field office was in Monroeville. I remember trekking up and down Rhode Isle Road, which is just a long road, long highway, basically. I'm like, where is this office? I cannot find this Obama office. I find it, and nobody was in there. And I'm like, I remember going to Facebook because that was what was popping at the time. I'm like, you got to sign up. We got to get him reelected. We don't want to go back. We don't want this year to be another 2000 and have Mitt Romney steal the election. And so once Pitt came around, I ran into one of the field organizers who had a clipboard. And I was just like, oh my God, I've been looking for you. And I ended up becoming an Obama for America fellow. And it was just this magical feeling of, I need to make sure every young person on this campus knows their power. And we weren't only just Pitt's field office, we were for the region's campuses. So I remember traveling to Point Park and poor Duquesne. They didn't even have a Duquesne Dems or anything like that. CMU, just registering students to vote. Our offices were above Panera Bread on Forbes Avenue. And I remember, because I'm an artist, I helped paint a mural of Obama in the office, but then the letters, OBAMA on the windows. And it just felt so amazing being part of something. I'm like, I want to be a psychology person when I grow up. I want to be on Nova. I want to be on PBS like I grew up watching. But I was so drawn to making sure I spent as long as I could on Forbes Ave, trying to register people to vote, having them know that reproductive justice was on the ballot, having them know that their student voice was so crucial. And I didn't know it at the time, but that experience changed my life. So, spoiler alert, Obama gets reelected. I was like, I got to keep this momentum. I love this. So I ended up joining the board of the Pitt College Democrats. I ended up interning in Pittsburgh City Council. I'm still a psychology major. At one point, I was like, should I be a double major? I'm like, no, I love the brain too much. But then I was on campus when Black Lives Matter rolled around. And I think it was the day after my birthday, I think in December. And I remember the feeling that I had. It was rainy. But I remember the feeling that I had protesting right outside the cathedral. And all of us students were just gathered there in one unified voice. It didn't matter if they were a psych major like me, if they were in pre-med and engineering, in math. We were all on the forefront of challenging our society to do better. And I'll never forget that feeling. And so I think that's what lit in my spirit community organizing and advocacy. So I remember, again, time after time again, organizing for Indigenous Peoples Day, organizing for Fight for 15, which we're still fighting for today.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically pennies at this point, but there was just something in me that wanted to keep that spirit of the ancestors alive. So, like I said, when I moved to Boston, I again found myself in the community organizing for Black Lives Matter Boston or Cambridge, or just finding myself gravitating to communities that looked like me. And then I was having an existential crisis. Like, I thought I wanted to be a psychiatrist, a neuroscientist when I grew up. What is happening? So as all of my colleagues are looking up graduate schools in neuroscience, I remember Googling, what is a social justice graduate program?
Mm-hmm.
And lo and behold, Pitt School of Social Work is the first thing that comes up. And I'm like, I know Pitt. I didn't know social work.
Mm-hmm. No, nobody really knows social work for real. Everyone just thinks social workers are the one who takes the kids away.
Right.
But clearly there's so much more to it.
I mean, its roots are in community advocacy and organizing. And Pitt was one of only a few schools in the country that offered this macro social justice, like public policy lens. And I missed Pittsburgh so much. And it's crazy because I left feeling like there was nothing here for me. And I know so many people who feel like that right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm going to go back home to the racism I know.
The casual one.
But I want to go back home to a place where I know the root causes of social issues. I know the rhythm of Pittsburgh. I know the people. I know our potential. And I came back home and went to the School of Social Work, got my MSW, graduated right in the middle of the pandemic, which I would not wish that experience on anybody.
Nope.
But it also reinforced how important social workers are in a time like that. So over that course of time, I ended up joining the board of the Young Democrats of Allegheny County, which is the Democratic Party for 18 to 40-year-olds. And again, it brought back that full circle of young people, right? And I found myself through, this virtual reality we were in. I was building a lot of relationships with grassroots organizations across the county who they were like, we need a newfound Democratic Party because it hasn't been active. It hasn't been activated. And so then I ended up becoming president of the Young Democrats of Allegheny County. And because of a lot of that grassroots coalition building that I fostered, I was asked by our current chair of the Allegheny County Democratic Committee, or essentially the Democratic Party of our region, to run with him. I'm like, you want me to do what? Because I remember always side-eyeing the ACDC. I remember always feeling like that wasn't a place for my working class Black woman self to be. And he had asked me like 2.5 times. And by the second half, I said, okay, I think we are aligned on a vision of what we can build for this region. Because it was up to Allegheny County to not have Donald Trump have a second term. It was down to Allegheny County.
PA is one of the most influential states in the country.
It absolutely is. And now we are at the point that we outvote Philadelphia. And it's like, what else can we do with that power? So my goal is just to have people be part of this process, because politics feels so complex. It feels not personal. It's been used against us time and time again. And I can understand why people feel like they just want to shut it out. But that's why we need people like me, like you, like anyone who's listening that want a better tomorrow. We need us. It's dependent on us to change that narrative. So it's beyond just telling people, oh, go vote, go vote, go vote. Like I always say to people, voting is a vitamin. You can't just depend on vitamins to make you healthy. You got to keep putting in work and in all the different factors that make you healthy, that make a healthy democracy, that keep us pushing forward. And it's uncomfortable. We might not see the change that we're fighting for, but that's why we need to challenge the system. And politics is such a complex system, but it begins with us. So that's also what informs my residency here at Pitt.
I was just about to ask about that, bringing art and advocacy together into one. Tell us about what's going on with the Honors College.
Yeah, so I will begin this conversation by saying building intentional relationships with people, especially kindred spirits and like minds, is so important. I, first of all, kept a relationship with the School of Social Work since I graduated. I think I've guest taught in almost every COSA class.
You love to see it.
COSA, community organizing and social action. But then I also met Ronnie Doko going on almost 4 years ago, because we were both Iris Marion Young awardees for racial and gender justice, or social justice and gender equity. I'm messing up the name of the award, but we both got it, okay? And I just knew from the start he was like a brother in the movement. I mean, I just kept in touch with him. I was part of multiple art exhibits here at Pitt, Black Lives in Focus, Art of Diversity, all of those ways of platforming voices that are often silenced. And so now that he is affiliated with the School of Social Work and, the Fredrick Honors College, we had a conversation early in the year about, how can we bring these things together? Maybe a residency. And I'm like, okay, how do I bring all my hats together? All of your hats can coexist. So I thought back to everything that I literally just said in this conversation just now. I thought back to the feeling I had as a Pitt student when I was feeling so unified with my fellow students. I was a studio arts minor. I also know the role that the arts play in social commentary and social justice. I mean, there's so many images that we recognize immediately, and they were used to raise up an issue, right? And so in that spirit of the arts holding this power, also in recent years, we kept hearing the word democracy thrown in mainstream media, like, oh, democracy, it's at stake.
It's crumbling. Like,
our democracy. But we don't do the due diligence in our society to really ground people in what democracy is and how precious it is and how personal it is. We are in post-January 6th America. I remember how much of a migraine I had that day, because I'm like, oh,
this is really
my
happening.
God. Oh my God. Like, why does this have to be my 20s that I'm witnessing the crumbling of America? But, I mean, now we're in post Roe v. Wade overturning, which is also signaled other human and civil rights at stake,
Because they can roll back one thing, what's stopping
They'll
them from
just
rolling
keep
back everything
domino
else?
affecting LGBTQ plus rights and contraception, all of these things that people literally died for, that are and were federal protections. And so all of this feels so convoluted and so scary and hopeless. And the media ain't gonna empower us to feel like we have a stake in it or we can change this. But art can. Young people have a voice in this. And so the purpose of my residency is to bring in subject matter experts on an issue related to democracy. And students get to hear from this person who's out in the trenches, whether it be, reproductive justice or LGBTQ plus justice. They get to learn about these things on a more personal level. I have a pretty human conversation like you and I are having right now. And it's open to the community as well. So audience members, they'll learn, and then from that conversation, they get to create a piece of art inspired by whatever they heard or the topic at large. And so, we have painting stations and drawing stations, writing stations. And the goal is for people to not feel as though they need to be Bob Ross Jr., but take yourself back to when you were in elementary school and you had art class. You didn't have any labels on you that society puts on you.
Just enjoy what's in front of you.
Mm-hmm. You weren't, I can't draw a stick figure. I can't draw a straight line. Even if I had a ruler, I'm not an artist. It's not about that. It's about just being inspired and using your creative voice to create something, to speak truth to power. And, you only have a limited time in that workshop, so you're not expected to create a whole, Kehinde Wiley mural. Look up Kehinde Wiley. He's an amazing artist. But it's to just challenge you to critically think about how we can build a better tomorrow, but then do so in a creative way. And our first session was on the topic of democracy. Like, how do we even define this thing? And the pieces that students made gave me goosebumps. And we have some of those now on exhibit in the Honors College. And I'm like, oh man, it's working. They're getting it. They're getting it. Our last session last week was on LGBTQ History Month. And a lot of people don't even know that October is LGBTQ History Month. And the conversation that we had, I think it afforded a space where people could feel safe, can feel empowered, and where you can actually foster real allyship, So that's the beauty of this residency. At the end, we're going to have a call for artists. And I encourage Pitt students on every corner of this campus community, Pittsburghers, everybody to contribute works of art about what does democracy mean to you, because we'll have that on exhibit at the end of the school year in the spring. But it's again to just uplift that beautiful power that art has and that agency and that inspiration that exists in all of us. So that's the essence of the residency.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
So we've talked about your past, and we just wrapped up talking about your present. But what does the future look like for Morgan Overton?
That's a loaded question.
It is a quite loaded question.
I think I'll go back to what I said earlier about just trusting the process. Because if you would have told me 10 years ago when I was a student here, oh, you're going to be the vice chair of the Democratic Party. Oh, you're going to be the Fredrick Honors College artist in residence. And I couldn't get into the Honors College, like I would have been like, ha ha ha, but how do I get there? You know? So I want to just be open to what's ahead, um, but be trusting in that whatever it is, it's going to fulfill my purpose.
Mm.
And I think that's all we need to lead with. I think we get so caught up as a society to be human doings. Like, what are you going to do? But we're not human beings. So I just want to be safe, healthy, surrounded by my village, my dog, creating, inspiring, uplifting, and keeping my eye on the prize for the next 7 generations.
Amen. Now, last thing that we're going to touch on before going to the second half in this artist spotlight, advice you have for people who are listening. First, I'm going to ask, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned in general? And then secondly, I'm going to ask specifically for what advice you can give to minority women who may have been where you were at previously and how they can move forward.
Biggest lesson as an artist or in general?
Just in general.
Never diminish your power. Never shrink yourself. I don't know if I really experienced the extent of imposter syndrome, but there were definitely moments when, because I was the only, or because I was the first, I was the youngest, I was the only Black person, that I was like, ugh, this feels uncomfortable. Am I supposed to be here? Did I walk into the wrong room? Meanwhile, you were meant to build that room. Actually, you were meant to tear that room down and start a new one. And so that's the biggest lesson I would tell all past Morgans, but even just current Morgan. Even though I have all these hats that I wear, I'm still figuring it out. And I think it's important that we humanize and have those conversations of people who, you know, on the surface they've made it, but they're still human at the end of the day. Because the higher you climb, the more likely you're going to still be the only. I mean, look at Kamala Harris. Oh my goodness.
Still so much scrutiny too.
I was going to say, they're calling that woman every name aside from Vice President of the United States. Right? You know, I say what you want to say about her, but goodness gracious. But I think that's something I would also answer for your second question, is that Black, brown, women artists, or people who carry intersectional identities that are marginalized in society, those are the voices that we need to hear from the loudest. Those are the voices, the ones with lived experience, that is the blueprint for the future. And I just encourage everyone to look up, be scholars of history. That's another form of advice I would say, is because a lot of the people that we tend to quote, if they were a writer, you know, like the Audre Lordes of the world or Maya Angelou, you know, they're highly revered now, but for them to get where they ended up, oh my God, that's the art of writing. There's also countless Black female artists, or just diverse artists across time who, you know, they didn't have a high school diploma, or they didn't have all the means ahead of them, but the works that they created spoke truths that people didn't even know that they held within them when they look at it, or it just spoke language that we so desperately needed in that moment of time. And so I encourage anyone that has an innovative or creative spirit within them, do not shy away from that. Do not dim your light. Your light can help guide the path for anyone and everyone around you. And we need to do a better job at raising that up while people are still here with us, especially here in Pittsburgh. I can go on a whole TED talk about how we need to do better by artists and creatives here in Pittsburgh, because a lot of them create out of self-preservation, or I had a great conversation with Patrick Fisher of the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council about how artists here in Pittsburgh feel like they have to leave. And even if they're successful, are they successful because of Pittsburgh or in spite of Pittsburgh?
Mm-hmm.
And we have such a rich history in the arts in Pittsburgh. That is part of our fiber. It's part of our history. We love to talk about the Andy Warhols and August Wilsons and Teenie Harrises, but both Andy and August had to leave Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's them. Imagine the Black women creatives.
The ones that we don't hear about.
Exactly. So how can we make sure we're holding ourselves to account to raise up the names of the creatives, the creative Black women and intersectional people in Homewood right now, in Wilkinsburg, in Penn Hills, in Carrick, in McKeesport? It keeps going.
Mm.
Because if we're not shining a light on them and their light, they're going to leave. So that's why I have such gratitude for this opportunity as an artist in residence, because I know that's not something that you could just easily pick up a giant eagle. Like, I'm going to go do that. To get to this point took a lot of hard work, but also trust. But a lot of people, they don't have the privilege of just knowing somebody or having the means. So that's why we need to make sure we mitigate any struggle as early as possible.
In some way, it's like you're getting your flowers, at least in some sort of way right now. But at the same time, I feel as though you're planting seeds for more flowers to grow.
Amen. And that's what brought me back home to Pittsburgh. I say this all the time, but I feel like, and this may sound wild, but I feel like Pittsburgh is a place that you can plant seeds and they can grow, but it's just dependent on who do you have around you to help pour into that?
Mm-hmm.
What resources do you have? What systems are at play to make sure that you get to flourish? Otherwise, people feel like they will wither away. And I see that in real time. So the goal is just to bring everybody in, make sure their voices are heard and not forgotten, and move from there. It's not rocket science.
This is a good place to hit our artist spotlight for this week's episode. This week, we're going to be playing Rachel from Friends by Biko. I hope y'all enjoy.
What is that, a kid's lullaby?
I do believe that we've moved on. I don't think that when people say online, we're gonna get back together. I don't think so, because I'm actively dating other women.
We so different, you and me. We so strange, but we complete. Mine for you, are you for me? I don't know until we'll see. When you left, I face defeat. I fell down, back on my feet. Clear my chakra, feel my cheek. Got my soul, please let me be. Are you getting enough? If so, then fill me up. I've been hitting this blunt, feel slow. I'm filling up. Oh, I get it. You tough, you smart, you think you know. I've been stuck in this game, at least I get a show. I made mistakes, my bad, but I make them right. I ain't seen her so long, she gone, wanted me tonight. When you need me, I'm there, I care if you be right. At the TV, we stare, we fuck.
Hope y'all enjoyed this week's Artist Spotlight by Biko. You can find his music. His main platform is YouTube, but I will have his YouTube, his Spotify, and his Instagram all linked in the description for you to find. So opening up the second half of this week's interview, we're getting into what we call the art dichotomy. So I'm sure the picture that most people have in their heads when they think of an artist, they think about someone who's living off daddy's money, who has connections to people in the industry, living out in a studio in LA, just free to do whatever without the fear of failure. We don't really think of, many people like Morgan Overton from a blue collar family, a Black woman with ties to psychology and social work and all of these things. So it's just interesting how the idea of you is so far removed from what we think of artists typically.
Mm. Woo! I feel like what you just said gave me inspiration for a painting. The very idea of somebody might be far from the reality of somebody, especially Black women. But I think the arts, when we're talking about a dichotomy, that's what it experiences. Because again, like I said, I was very lucky to have parents who saw that I had creative gifts and talents, and they didn't shun me away from that. That's not always the story that I hear from creative people. Most often it's, oh God, they didn't want me to do any art. They wanted me to be a doctor.
Doctor, engineer, lawyer. I feel
Right.
like it's one of three if you're
Exactly.
Black in America.
Exactly. And so imagine how much creativity is repressed and suppressed because they were not given the encouragement or the door open to pursue art. It's seen as something that, oh, you won't make money, the starving artist trope, that you're going to just be on the struggle bus. Simultaneously, we see art be highly revered, right? You see auctions, museums feel like a not inclusive space, and that's a whole conversation within itself. About what museums choose to exhibit versus not.
The whole scope of art.
Mm-hmm. I remember, just as a side, when I lived in Boston, I went to one of the museums there, and it was a room of, all the classics or, Eurocentric portraits. And all of a sudden, I see this beautiful, vibrant portrait of an everyday Black person. And that was my first discovery of Kehinde Wiley's work, of just making Black people that you would see downtown, pretty much, look like the most majestic humans to exist, and we are. But oh my God, just seeing that just disrupted, like, well, like this is what museums can be, where you see yourself on the walls and there doesn't have to be a monetary element to it. You just get to enjoy that. Now, a lot of museums, like in DC, like the Smithsonian, for example, it's free. You can you can go. Here, you got to pay some coins to see some art on the walls. And my first exhibit was at the Braddock Carnegie Library. And I remember how amazing that felt to allow community members to see themselves in art right down the street.
That's accessible. Exactly.
Exactly. Art making is a form of uplifting accessibility, And so when we talk about this dichotomy, we're already reinforcing what society thinks of an artist when we tell a child, no, put that crayon down and go, read a book. How about both? That's what happened with me. I loved the brain growing up. I loved history, and I also loved art. And they all coexisted. And I feel like we live in such a binary society.
We think everything's exclusive.
Mm-hmm. It's either one or the other. There's no, intersectionality between the multiple identities and multiple experiences and existences. And I feel like those intersectionalities is what informs a beautiful piece of art to be made, So again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but art is for everybody. I minored in it, but you don't have to go to school. You don't have to go to the Pratts of the world to be highly revered. And I think a lot of people might go into it just to, go viral and all that kind of stuff. But, you have to be mindful of what you're putting out there into the world. Is it just to, get monetary reward, which it don't hurt, we want to get paid. Artists should be paid fairly and for their worth, yes. But then there's also the other element of, your why. Why are you creating? Why are you doing this? Is it to speak truth to power? And then there's another dichotomy of the Black artist that because you're Black, you feel an obligation to use art making as a way to raise up what is wrong with society, which that's wonderful. That's great. Like, that's what I do. But sometimes you're an artist and you also happen to be Black and you want to just paint a flower and it's just a flower and it can just exist as a flower.
But is it a Black flower?
Right. Is it a social justice flower? Like, what is the flower trying to tell us? So again, I just encourage all of us to get out of this binary way of thinking of boxing and labeling. And that is literally the antithesis of art. Like, it should be boundless. The world should be your oyster as a creative. And if we're putting societal norms and labels over that and making it inaccessible, then what are we doing?
I feel like a big reason for why we don't see many Black artists, especially around here, is just because of the history of generational poverty when it comes to Black families. And
yes.
Black parents are just trying to make sure that their children can get them out of that hole. And art is not seen as a way to do that. So I guess a question is, how do we make art more accessible to Black and minority children?
Ooh. It's interesting because I think about when art is uplifted and poured into financially, especially from like the philanthropic community. First of all, let me just take an even bigger step back. I feel like we don't do diligence, just how I was talking about, we don't do diligence of informing people of what democracy is. We don't do the due diligence of teaching people what it means to be an artist and how to make it as an artist and what do you need to do, not in terms of going to school or education, but how can you make this a living? Because to your point, yeah, that's such a valid concern of so many people who are just trying to put food on the table. You want to support Keisha and her artwork, but then you also are confronted with reality too. So how can systems like the philanthropic community or just in general as a society, how can we make sure that we mitigate those barriers and burdens so that people don't have to choose either or? Do I put food on the table or do I get a new set of crayons?
It's like that hierarchy of needs.
Exactly. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. One thing I remember from psych class. But we're always confronted with having to choose out of survival. And I see so many people having to do that here in Pittsburgh. Not too long ago, I was part of a discussion of what the arts and artists need in Pittsburgh post this COVID reality that we're in. And one broader conversation that happened in that discussion was it wasn't just COVID. I mean, that unveiled all of systemic ills, right? But to your exact point, say you are a pretty popular or, you're a reputable artist here in Pittsburgh, and that's what you're known for. But do you have stable and affordable housing? Do you have reliable public transportation? Yeah, your art might be helping sustain your income, but is there something else that there's a gap and you're trying to hustle and grind your way to make art to make up for that? are you able to afford food? Are you able to do this? Are you able to just live in our most livable city? And that's why a lot of people leave, because a lot of those things can't coexist.
Mm-hmm.
So, what can we do as a region to take away those burdens from artists who are established, artists who are emerging, or somebody today who might realize, hey, I think I might like art. And the conversations can start as early as possible. We don't need to wait until someone's 18 years old. I think that's way too late. It's the same with getting them registered to vote or talk about civic engagement. If you're waiting until they're 18, that's too late. Because again, we keep reinforcing societal norms in our mind well before we turn 18. So I want to be able to see young, especially Black creatives thrive in this city, in this region, because it helps the region thrive. It helps that person thrive and be seen and valued and honored as a critical part of our community. But it has to start early, and it has to be done so with intention and not out of reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
And we saw that a lot throughout COVID, obviously, for valid reasons. But it's always in reaction to, oh, this tragic thing happened. Oh, let's have a Black Arts Initiative.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, why can't this just exist? Why
All
do
the
we
time,
have to
yeah.
exactly? Why can't we just exist? Why do we always have to be associated with, a lack or a tragedy? But really, we could be proactive and invest in the people who can bring us joy.
I think that another way of advancing artistry in Black culture is if there was a figure. Like, I feel like back in 2008, Obama got a lot of people into the political scene, but art isn't as mainstream as politics. So even if there was a Black figure who is there to usher in a new generation, I just don't know how many people would see it, Which is why I feel like you having this conversation is great, because I'm sure there's many people out there, many Black women out there who are aspiring artists or, thinking about art, but they've never seen the reality and that you can be a successful artist. So you're like a living image of that.
Thank you. And for anybody who's listening or tuning into this, just know that I see you. I know what you're experiencing right now, but just know that you are so needed. And this is your sign to just do it. Post the thing on the Instagrams. I'm old now, I guess. So go on TikTok, go on the TikToks. Put yourself out there, because honestly, especially if you're part of a marginalized community, you got to be your best advocate. So go and take a risk. I think that's all I've done my entire life, is just take a risk, but it was rooted in trust in myself. And, if it doesn't go the way you want it to, dust yourself off and try again. But no, just doing that start gets you farther than you even begun or than you were yesterday. And so I think that risk-taking, that innovation is so needed in today's world. As artists, as creatives, as politicos, as people who are civically engaged, as just people in general, we need to just be risk takers.
So wrapping up this section on the dichotomies in art, is there anything else that you'd like to add or close with?
Not really. I think we could just do better. And remember that things can coexist. And I said it before and I'll say it again. It's not rocket science. Sometimes we overcomplicate the most simplest things. And I will also reiterate to be scholars of history, because I think now that we have technology and just all of these more advanced tools and resources and systems, that also can work against us because we can overcomplicate. So defer to what people, what their resources were back in the day, because often there were a lot of figures in the arts or in civic engagement or in politics that people could point to and say, that's my North Star. I want to be like that person one day. Or not. You have a choice. So I think just keeping people's options open is the best that we can do in a democracy. And I will drop the mic on that.
Okay. Well, this has been quite the insightful conversation. It was a pleasure and a blessing to have you on. Is there anything else that you want to get across to the listeners before we sign off?
You can follow my work on Instagram at Mo in the Studio, MO in the Studio, and support a sister.
Definitely got you on that. Don't worry about that. Now, last thing before we get off, Dr. Toya Jones from your School of Social Work made a little goodie bag for you to take on your way. For everybody watching and listening, Healing Overflow with Dr. Toya Jones will be linked in the description. I would highly recommend that you check her show out because you can learn a lot from a scholar of social work. Now, whoa, that's a brain freeze right there. This has been an incredible episode of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. Again, it was great having Morgan Overton on. And this is your host, Ian Kahende, signing off. Peace out, everybody.
Peace, y'all.